A modern fairy tale that crashed and burned. Here's the thing. Her name actually became a verb in the Urban Dictionary. Yeah, you heard that right. The definition? Dropping people once they're no longer useful. And before you think that's harsh, wait till you hear how this whole thing started. 4 different stories about how they met, overlapping timelines with her ex-boyfriend, and friends who suddenly disappeared the moment royalty entered the picture. This isn't the romance story you've been told, not even close. Before we get into this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because what you're about to hear gets crazy. Instagram posts, jewelry clues, and friends who got dropped overnight. Smash that like if you want the full story. Let's dive in. Okay, so here's where things get messy right from the start. They can't even keep their own story straight about how they met. Seriously, listen to this. In one version, it's a blind date. Harry's talking about how it was set up blind, and she's agreeing like, yeah, didn't know anything about him beforehand. Then the story changes. Suddenly, it's Instagram. They met through Instagram. She saw his feed, he saw hers, they started messaging. Wait, hold on. Now it's Snapchat? Yeah, apparently someone sent one of them a video of the other on Snapchat, and that's how it started. Oh, but also there's this mutual friend named Violet who introduced them. So which one is it? Pick a story and stick with it.
Someone who was a friend had this video of the two of them, it was like a Snapchat.
But here's what makes this whole thing even more interesting. Let's talk about the timeline for a second because this is where it gets confusing. April 2016. She's with chef Corey Vitiello. Not just seeing him casually, they'd been together for 2 years at this point. And in April, Corey's posting pictures on Instagram with her dog, Guy. The caption says something about his morning routine and calls her his lady. That's his post. His lady. That's April 2016. Now Harry comes out and says their first date was in July. Beginning of July 2016. He's specific about it, talks about how they met once, then twice, back-to-back dates in London at the start of July.
We met once and then twice, back-to-back, 2 dates in London last July.
So, according to Harry's own words, they met in July. But Corey's posting about his lady in April. You see where this is going? And it gets better. The Invictus Games happened in Toronto that year, Harry's event. Guess who was there? She was. But here's the kicker. She was there as Corey's +1. Corey was working as a chef at one of the functions, and she came with him as his girlfriend. So she's at Harry's event with her boyfriend at the time. Think about that for a second. She's in Toronto at the Invictus Games with Corey. And somehow that's where the connection with Harry happens. But Harry says their first date was in July back in London. The math isn't mathing here. You've got Corey posting lovey-dovey stuff about his lady in April. You've got her as Corey's date at the Invictus Games. You've got Harry claiming July was when it all started with those 2 back-to-back dates in London. The timeline just doesn't line up. Either Harry's wrong about when they started dating or something was going on before July that nobody wants to talk about. And look, relationships end, people move on. That's life. But when you're telling the world this was some magical blind date situation where she didn't even know who he was, and then the dates don't match up with when she was still posting couple stuff with someone else, that's when people start asking questions. It's not even about judging anyone's personal life. It's about the story they're telling versus what the timeline shows. If you're going to go on Netflix and talk about your fairy tale romance, maybe make sure the dates work out first. Because right now, we've got 4 different versions of how they met. A boyfriend who was still in the picture way later than they want us to believe, and a whole lot of question marks around when this thing started. Now let's talk about the whole blind date thing, because it gets even more interesting. Turns out she'd been coming to London since 2013. Not just visiting, she was coming there with a specific goal in mind. She told people she wanted to marry an Englishman, and not just any Englishman, someone famous. So this wasn't some random vacation habit. There was intention behind these trips. Fast forward to 2016, and she lands this gig with Ralph Lauren at Wimbledon. Sweet opportunity, right? Gets to wear their stuff, show up at one of the biggest events in London, rub shoulders with the right crowd. And that's where things started falling into place. While she's there doing this Ralph Lauren thing, she meets someone named Violet von Westenholz. Now, Violet works in PR for Ralph Lauren, so they're in the same circles for this event. Here's where it gets good. Violet's not just some random PR person. Her father happens to be close with Prince Charles. Like, close friends. So Violet's got direct access to the royal circle, and she's the one who ends up connecting Harry and Meghan. Violet makes the introduction happen. She's the link between them. But here's what doesn't make sense. They keep pushing this blind date narrative. Harry's out there saying it was blind, she didn't know who he was, the whole thing was a surprise. And she's backing him up on this. When someone first mentioned Harry to her, she claims her response was asking which prince. Like she had no clue. Didn't know who he was, never heard of him, in the dark about the whole royal family situation. Then she says she never Googled him.
I didn't know much about him, and so the only thing that I had asked her when she said she wanted to set us up was, I had one question. I said, well, is he nice?
Made a point of saying she didn't look him up online, didn't do any research, went into this fresh, with no preconceived notions. Because apparently that showed she wasn't impressed by the royalty thing, which Harry thought was important. He liked that she didn't know anything about him because it meant she wouldn't be weird about the whole prince situation. But wait, later on, she admits she did look him up, just not on Google. She looked at his Instagram feed.
People say, did you Google him? No. But that's your homework. You're like, look, let me see what they're about in their feed, not what someone else says about them.
Asked to see his social media, checked out what he was posting, saw what his life looked like through his photos. But in her mind, that's different from Googling someone. Instagram doesn't count as research, apparently. It's just casually browsing someone's carefully curated public profile to see what they're about. Not the same thing. So, let me get this straight. She's been coming to London for 3 years, saying she wants to marry a famous Englishman. She gets connected to Harry through Violet, whose dad is tight with Prince Charles. But it's a blind date. She doesn't know which prince they're talking about. Never Googled him, but did check out his Instagram feed, which somehow doesn't count as looking him up. And we're all supposed to believe this was just this random, spontaneous, unplanned meeting where she walked in clueless about who she was about to meet. The story they're telling just has all these convenient details that don't quite add up when you put them next to each other. You can't be coming to London for years looking for a famous British husband, get connected through someone with direct royal family ties, check out his social media, and then claim it was this innocent blind date where you had no idea who he was. That's not how blind dates work. That's not how any of this works. And look, maybe she didn't know much about him beyond what she saw on Instagram. Maybe she did ask which prince at first. But the way the whole thing is framed, like it was pure coincidence and chance, and she just stumbled into dating a prince with zero awareness of what was happening, that's where people start raising eyebrows. Because the timeline and the connections tell a different story than the one they want us to believe. So now we need to talk about her work history, because this is where the exaggerations start showing up. She went on Rachel Ray's show and Craig Ferguson's show, both big platforms, and told them she worked for the U.S. Embassy in Argentina. Not that she did an internship there or volunteered there. She said she worked for the U.S. Embassy. That's what came out of her mouth on national television, multiple times. Here's what happened. It was a 5-week study program. Her uncle worked at the embassy, and as a favor to her dad, he helped get her into this short program. 5 weeks. That's it. But when you're sitting on a talk show couch and you say, I worked for the U.S. Embassy in Buenos Aires, people assume you had an actual job there. They think you were employed by the embassy, doing diplomatic work, having this impressive international career. Nobody thinks, oh, she probably means a 5-week student program her uncle arranged. And that wasn't the only thing on her resume. Her CV was stacked. Lifestyle writer, travel writer, corporate spokesperson, entrepreneur, activist, model. She'd done it all, apparently. Been all over the world, lived in various countries, had all these different careers going on at once. It was impressive on paper. The kind of resume that makes you go, wow, she's accomplished a lot. But here's the thing about reinventing yourself. When you do it enough times, people start noticing the pattern. She'd been a lot of different iterations of herself over the years. Each one fit whatever situation she was in at the time. Whatever image worked best for where she wanted to go next, that's what showed up. And look, everyone evolves and grows and changes. That's normal. But there's a difference between growing as a person and reshaping your entire background, depending on who's watching. It got to the point where someone made her name into an entry in the Urban Dictionary. Not a fan page, not a tribute, a dictionary definition. And what was the definition? The act of cutting people off once they're not useful to you anymore. Ghosting people the second they can't do anything else for your situation. That's what her name became associated with. When you've reached the point where your name becomes a verb for dropping people, that's saying something about the pattern you've created. The work history stuff matters because it shows how the story gets shaped to fit the moment. Embassy work sounds way more impressive than a student program. A stack of careers sounds better than a series of brief gigs. And when you're trying to present yourself as this worldly, accomplished person who's done all these amazing things, the details matter. But when those details don't hold up under scrutiny, when the 5-week program becomes, I worked for the embassy on TV, that's when people start wondering what else isn't quite accurate.
I double majored theater and international relations, and then I went and worked for the U.S. Embassy for a bit. And
Where?
In Argentina.
None of this came out right away. At first, everyone just took the CV at face value. Of course she worked at the embassy. She said so on television. Of course she had all these different careers. Why would she lie? It wasn't until later that people started checking these claims and going, wait, hold on, this doesn't match up with what happened. And by then, the story had already been told so many times that it had become the accepted narrative. What matters here is the pattern. It's not about one exaggerated job or one stretched truth. It's about the consistent trend of presenting reality in a way that's more impressive than what occurred. And when you combine that with everything else, the multiple stories about meeting Harry, the timeline issues with Corey, the Instagram versus Google distinction, you start seeing how carefully constructed all of this is. Every detail is polished to present the best possible angle, even when that doesn't quite match up with the facts.
Meghan's ex-best friend, Nanaki Pretty, who has known Meghan since they were 2 years old, has now sold pictures and an exclusive interview to the Daily Mail.
Let's talk about the friendships that just disappeared. Nanaki Pretty was her childhood best friend. We're not talking about someone she knew for a few years. They grew up together. Best friends from when they were kids. That's the kind of friendship where you know everything about each other, you've been through all the awkward phases together. You're basically family at that point. And then one day, nothing. Gone. Dropped without any explanation. No fight, no falling out that Nanaki knew about, just silence. The friendship was over and Nanaki had to figure that out on her own because there was no conversation about it. One day, they're best friends. The next day, Nanaki doesn't exist in her world. According to Nanaki, things started changing after Suits took off. The show was getting more popular, she was getting more recognized, and everything about her started shifting. The way she laughed wasn't the same. The way she talked changed. Even the way she walked was different. Nanaki said it was like watching someone become an entirely different person. Not just growing or maturing, transforming into someone else. Someone Nanaki didn't recognize. And Ninaki said something that stands out. She described not being able to see the person she grew up with. That's not, oh, she's changed a bit, or we grew apart. That's, the person I was friends with for all those years has been replaced by someone I don't know. When your childhood best friend says they can't find any trace of who you used to be, that's significant. But here's what makes it even more telling. Ninaki described how she could just end friendships instantly, like flipping a switch. 1 second you're in, the next second you're out, and there's no in-between.
Ninaki Pretty is actually the exception in the Disposable Friends series for Meghan Markle. She actually wasn't ghosted or rejected by Meghan Markle. It was more that she ended the friendship.
No gradual drifting apart. No slow fade, just an immediate cutoff. And apparently she was good at it. Ninaki described this ability to just shut people out and walk away without looking back. Ninaki wasn't the only one. Millie McIntosh had the same experience. Millie was on Made in Chelsea, that British reality show. They were friends, things seemed fine, and then royalty entered the picture. Suddenly, Millie was out. Done. The reality TV connection didn't fit the image she wanted. You can't be trying to build this sophisticated royal persona while still being buddies with people from reality television. So Millie got the same treatment Ninaki got. Just dropped. The pattern here is what's important. It's not one friendship that ended badly. It's multiple people who all describe the same thing, being cut off suddenly without explanation once they didn't fit the current situation. When you're trying to move up in the world, sometimes old friends become liabilities. They know too much, they remember who you were before, they don't match the new image you're trying to create. And think about it from their perspective for a second. You're someone's best friend growing up. You're there for all the struggles, all the auditions that didn't work out, all the times things were hard. Then things start getting better for them. They're on a successful show, they're dating someone famous, their whole life is changing. And instead of bringing you along or at least staying in touch, you just get erased. No explanation, no goodbye, just silence. That's gotta be brutal. The childhood friend thing especially hits different because those are the people who knew you before any of the fame or status or royal connections. They remember when you were just a regular person trying to make it. And maybe that's why they had to go. When you're reinventing yourself and building a new narrative about who you are, the people who remember the old, you become a problem. They're walking reminders of a version of yourself you don't want people to see. What Ninaki said about not recognizing her, that keeps coming back. Because it's not just about changing your style or growing up or becoming more polished. It's about fundamentally becoming a different person. And when the people who knew you best say they can't see any trace of who you used to be, that tells you something about how complete that transformation was.
Gina Nelthorpe-Cowan had completely pulled the rug out from under her feet and shocked her with the outcome of their relationship.
Now here's a story that shows how this whole pattern worked. There was this woman named Gina Nelthorpe-Cowan who was working with her on various projects. Gina was pretty well connected in the business world and had put together this important event called the One Young World Summit. Big deal. We're talking 1,300 delegates, high-profile speakers, influential people from everywhere. And Gina got her a spot as one of the featured speakers. This wasn't some small gig. This was a legitimate platform with serious visibility. So she's scheduled to speak at this summit, and she's got some specific requests. She wants photographs with certain people who are going to be there. Justin Trudeau's attending. She wants a photo with him. Kofi Annan's there too. She wants that photo as well. These are significant names, and getting photographed with them would be huge for her profile. It's the kind of thing you can put on your website, share on social media, use to build credibility. Makes sense that she'd want those photos. The event comes around and she gets her photo with Justin Trudeau. That one works out. But the other photos she wanted didn't happen. Only the Trudeau one. And apparently that wasn't enough, because the next morning, She tells Gina she can't do the speech. Can't do it. This is the morning of the event, when 1,300 people are expecting her to speak, and she's backing out. But here's what makes this situation interesting. The night before this went down, she'd had a conversation with Gina. She wanted Gina to handle her PR and media stuff moving forward. Basically wanted Gina to manage her public image, coordinate with media outlets, handle the communications work that goes into building and maintaining a public profile. That's a massive job. Takes a lot of time, requires a whole team, costs money to do properly. And then comes the catch. She couldn't pay for it, wanted Gina to do this work, put together this whole PR operation, but there wasn't going to be any compensation for it. Expected Gina to handle everything for free, presumably because of the connection to Harry and what that might mean down the line. Like the opportunity to work with someone dating a prince should be payment enough. Gina said no, she declined that offer. And honestly, can you blame her? She's running a business. She's got overhead, staff to pay, actual clients who compensate her for her work. You can't expect someone to drop everything and work for free because you're dating someone famous. That's not how professional relationships work. So Gina passes on that arrangement. And the next morning, the speech gets canceled. No speech, no appearance, nothing. The spot that Gina had arranged for her at this summit goes empty. Those delegates who were expecting to hear from her, they get nothing. And Gina's left dealing with the fallout of her featured speaker pulling out at the last minute. But wait, it gets better. About a week after this happens, Gina gets an email. And this email isn't asking to reschedule or explaining what happened or trying to smooth things over. This email is cutting ties. Done. The working relationship is over, the professional connection is finished, and there's no room for discussion about it. A clean break via email. And that was it. Gina never heard from her again. No follow-up, no explanation beyond that initial email, no attempt to maintain any kind of relationship. Someone who had gone out of their way to create opportunities for her, who'd given her a platform at an international event, who'd spent time and effort building that connection. Gone, erased, like their entire working relationship had never existed. The timeline here tells you everything you need to know. Night before the event. Can you handle my PR for free? Answer is no. Next morning, I can't do the speech. 1 week later, we're done, don't contact me again. That's not a coincidence. That's cause and effect. When someone won't give you what you want, they become expendable. And the way to handle that is to cut them out completely and move on to the next person who might be more useful. What makes this particular story stand out is how transactional it was. There was no pretense of friendship here, no long personal history like with Nanaki. This was a business relationship, and it ended the moment it stopped serving its purpose. When Gina wouldn't provide free labor, she became worthless. And worthless people get discarded. That's the pattern showing up again in a professional context instead of a personal one. All right, so the relationship goes public and Harry puts out an official statement. This is unprecedented. Harry had never done anything like this for any previous relationship. Not for Chelsea, not for Cressida, nobody. But for this one, he releases a whole statement through Kensington Palace asking the press to back off. Now, she's saying something interesting in the documentary. She claims she made a choice not to read any media coverage. Not the positive stuff, not the negative stuff, nothing.
But I knew that if I didn't say it, that I would do it. And I just didn't want to be alive anymore.
Says she wanted to protect herself from it. Keep that poison out of her brain. Stay focused on the relationship instead of getting caught up in what people were writing about her. That's her version. Complete media blackout. Didn't look at any of it. But here's where it gets confusing. The documentary is basically her reacting to particular articles. She's talking about certain headlines, referencing pieces that were written, getting emotional about exact stories that came out. You can't do that if you haven't read them. You can't have detailed reactions to articles you've never seen. You can't quote headlines from pieces you've never looked at. So which is it? Either she didn't read anything like she claims, or she read it and is now saying she didn't. Those two things can't both be true. And the documentary makes it pretty clear which one is accurate, because she's showing you the articles while talking about how they made her feel. That's not someone who stayed away from the media. That's someone who read every single word and remembers exactly what was said. The thing is, most people in her position would read what's being written about them. That's normal. When you're suddenly thrust into this massive spotlight and everyone's talking about you, of course you're going to look. Human nature. The odd part isn't that she read the articles, it's that she's claiming she didn't while simultaneously proving that she did. And think about what Harry said too. He's talking about how they were being hit so hard at the beginning with things that weren't true. How they made the choice together to not read anything. How it didn't make sense to engage with it because so much of it was inaccurate. But if they're not reading any of it, how do they know what's true and what's false? How are they having conversations about certain articles being wrong if nobody's looking at them? And the statement Harry put out was pretty strong. He's describing how the press was treating her, talking about the coverage and how intense it was. That's serious stuff. And look, the media can definitely be brutal, especially British tabloids. They're not known for their gentle approach to public figures. But Harry's framing this like she's under siege, like there's this coordinated attack happening. Meanwhile, if you actually look at the coverage from that first week, most of it was positive. People were excited. The British public was into the idea of this relationship. There were articles, sure, but the overall tone was more curiosity than hostility. A few pieces here and there that were critical, but nothing like the siege mentality Harry's describing in his statement. But the statement worked. It shut down a lot of the coverage. Papers got more careful about what they wrote. And it established this narrative that she needed protection, that the media was coming after her, that Harry needed to shield her from these forces. Never mind that she was actively encouraging attention in other ways. The jewelry with initials, the Instagram posts, the smiling at photographers. The official story became that she was being hounded by the press. The contradiction between I didn't read anything and here's my detailed reaction to certain articles is important because it shows how the narrative gets shaped. You can't claim to be above the media while also being completely immersed in it. You can't say you're protecting yourself from coverage while memorizing every headline. It's one or the other. And when you try to have it both ways, people notice the inconsistency. What's happening here is the creation of a particular narrative while simultaneously being hyper aware of every single thing being said. She's reading it, remembering it, reacting to it, but maintaining this public stance of being disconnected from it. That gives you the best of both worlds. You get to control the story about how you're being treated, while also staying on top of exactly what's being said about you. So now we get to the whole attention situation, and this is where things get confusing. She's out in London, walking around, buying flowers, and when the photographers show up, because of course they show up, she's dating Prince Harry, she's smiling, she's pleasant with them, she's posing for photos. One photographer even said she facilitated the whole thing, smiled at them, and they got beautiful pictures. She seemed totally comfortable with it. But then there's this jewelry situation. She's wearing necklaces with an M and H on them. Not subtle little charms hidden under her shirt, visible necklaces that photographers can clearly see and put in their pictures. Then there's a ring with an H on it. Again, not hiding it, wearing it where everyone can see it. These aren't accidents. When you wear someone's initial on your jewelry, you know what message that sends. Especially when you're dating someone famous and, cameras are around. And the Instagram posts. Pictures of peonies with hashtags about London. Photos of two bananas cuddling together. Not exactly subtle symbolism there. Tea and puzzles, which happens to be what the Queen loves. Every post is dropping little hints, little breadcrumbs for people to pick up on and connect to Harry. It's not direct, but it's not exactly subtle either. Anyone paying attention could see what was being communicated. Then the narrative shifts. Suddenly the attention is too much. It's overwhelming. She can't handle the photographers following her around. The same photographers she was smiling at and posing for earlier. Now they're a problem. The same attention she was encouraging with the jewelry and the Instagram posts. Now it's intrusive. The story changed from "look at me" to "leave me alone" quickly. And Harry tells her something notable. He says she needs to act like she doesn't want the cameras. Not that she doesn't want them, that she needs to act like she doesn't want them. That's a direct instruction on how to behave for public consumption. Pretend you hate the attention even if you don't. Put on the right face for the narrative they're trying to build. Her response to that is telling too. She's saying she's trying to be pleasant and doesn't know what else to do. Playing it off like she's being nice and doesn't understand why that's a problem. But here's the thing. She's an actress. That's her profession. Being in front of cameras, knowing how to work them, understanding angles and lighting and how to present yourself, that's what she does for a living. Acting like she doesn't know how her behavior reads to cameras doesn't hold up when being on camera is your job. Then comes the Vanity Fair situation. Harry had made it clear he wanted to wait for the Queen's approval before talking publicly about their relationship. That was important to him. Following proper protocol, respecting the institution, doing things the right way. But the Vanity Fair cover happens anyway. Wild About Harry splashed across the front with her photo. And in the interview, she's talking about how they're in love, how they're a couple, putting it out there for the world to see. The reporter who did that interview had some observations worth noting. When he showed up at her place in Toronto, he noticed London history books all over her coffee table. Not hidden away, right there on display where any visitor would see them. Kind of a coincidence that someone who claims she didn't know anything about British royalty would have London history books prominently displayed. He also called Serena Williams to fact-check their friendship. She'd listed Serena as one of her close friends. But when the reporter talked to Serena, she said they were acquaintances, not close friends. That's a significant difference. Acquaintances are people you know, maybe see occasionally at events. Close friends are people you have relationships with. Those aren't the same thing. Some of the other stuff she'd claimed about her background didn't quite add up either when they started checking. The reporter said it felt calculated, rehearsed. Like she had an agenda and a narrative she was trying to get across, and every answer was carefully crafted to support that story. When the piece came out focusing on her relationship with Harry instead of everything else she wanted to talk about, she wasn't happy. Called the reporter, told him she was disappointed, said she thought they could be friends, then stopped talking to him. Same pattern again. When someone doesn't give her what she wants, they get cut off. Later, she had complaints about the headline too. The magazine stood by their choice. It was a reference to an old song, nothing more. But it showed the pattern. When something doesn't go your way, find a way to reframe it, rather than acknowledging you didn't like how it turned out. The whole period of time shows this, back and forth between wanting attention and rejecting it. Encouraging photographers, then complaining about them, dropping hints on social media, then saying the coverage is too much. Doing interviews that talk about the relationship, then being upset about how they're framed. You can't have it both ways. Either you want the attention or you don't. Either you're comfortable with cameras or you're not. Trying to play both sides makes the contradictions more obvious. So that's how the first year of this relationship went down. And when you put all these pieces together, something starts to emerge that's hard to ignore. You've got multiple stories about how they met, Was it a blind date, Instagram, Snapchat, a mutual friend? The story kept changing depending on who was telling it and when. And those aren't small details. How you met someone is usually something you get straight from the beginning. But here, it shifted every time it got told. Then there's the timeline with Corey. He's posting about my lady in April. She's his +1 at the Invictus Games. But Harry says their first date was in July. The dates overlap in ways that don't quite make sense unless something else was going on that nobody wants to talk about. And look, relationships end and new ones begin. That happens. But when you're building this narrative about a magical blind date and true love at first sight, the timeline matters. It either adds up or it doesn't. The London visits since 2013 paint a different picture too. She'd been going there with specific intentions, telling people she wanted to marry a famous Englishman. She gets connected to Harry through Violet, whose dad is close with Prince Charles. But we're supposed to believe it was all random and unplanned, that she walked into that first meeting having no idea who she was about to see, despite having London history books on her coffee table and having checked out his Instagram feed. The work history exaggerations showed up early. The 5-week student program that became I worked for the U.S. Embassy on national television. The resume full of impressive-sounding careers that didn't quite hold up when people started checking. It established this pattern of presenting the most polished angle on reality, even when that angle stretched pretty far from what happened. Then there are the friendships. Ninaki, who grew up with her and got dropped without explanation once things changed. Millie from Made in Chelsea, Gone the Second Royalty entered the picture. Gina, who created opportunities and got cut off via email when she wouldn't work for free. The consistency is clear. People are useful until they're not, and then they disappear from the story. The attention thing might be the clearest example of the contradictions. Smiling at photographers one day, complaining about them the next. Wearing jewelry with his initials where cameras can see it, then saying the attention is too much. Posting cryptic Instagram hints about the relationship, then claiming she wants privacy. Harry literally telling her she needs to act like she doesn't want the cameras, which is an instruction on how to perform for public consumption rather than how to feel. And the whole I didn't read any media thing while simultaneously having detailed reactions to specific articles in the documentary. You can't have it both ways. Either you're reading it or you're not. Either you're above the coverage or you're deeply immersed in it. Trying to claim both just highlights the contradiction. The Vanity Fair situation brought a lot of this together. Harry wanting to wait for proper approval, her doing the interview anyway. The reporter noticing how calculated and rehearsed everything felt. Serena Williams saying they were acquaintances when she'd been listed as a close friend. The background details that didn't check out. And then cutting off the reporter when the piece didn't turn out exactly how she wanted. This was just year one. Just the beginning of what would become the most talked about royal relationship in modern history. But these first 12 months set up patterns that would keep showing up. The shape-shifting stories, the managed narratives, the people who got left behind, the contradictions between what was said and what occurred. The fairy tale is what most people heard. But when you look at the timeline, the connections, the changing stories, and the trail of people who got dropped along the way, a different picture emerges. One where things were more calculated and less spontaneous than the public narrative suggested. And this was only